He arrived at dawn on the day before the alignment, and Azindo's shadow knew him before anyone else did. The shadow had been growing sharper since WuDon's arrival. The interlocking of the binding with the communion had amplified both pieces a combined awareness that saw the system with the depth and clarity of two eyes where before there had been one. Adding Zuera's weave the previous afternoon had deepened the effect further. 3 interlocked pieces producing a 3-part harmony that gave Azindo's perception a richness he could not have imagined 10 days ago. He could feel the system's pulse the way a drummer feels rhythm in the skin, in the blood, in the spaces between heartbeats. Now, when the 4th piece entered the old quarter's perimeter, his shadow did not merely sense it. It read it the way a hand reads Braille. Felt its shape, its texture, its weight. The candidate, young, male, a mind that had been broken and rebuilt around knowledge, the way a shattered bone heals around a pin different from before, stronger in some places, more fragile in others. He carried the protocol's mark, a distinct pattern that identified its bearer as someone who had been through the breaking, the reformation, the integration. Pognazara carried the same mark, buried under 43 years of deliberate silence. This man's mark was fresh, active, broadcasting, but dimmed, deliberately dimmed. The candidate was moving through Ironhaven's streets with his presence turned down to a whisper still detectable to Azindo's sharpened awareness, but quiet enough to avoid triggering whatever was listening in the chamber below. The dimming was not a protocol technique. It was something personal, something practiced, the survival habit of a man who had spent his life making himself small enough to avoid notice. A scavenger's skill, a marginal man's inheritance. He walked into the courtyard with the careful pace of someone who had learned that sudden movements attracted predators. Thin. His clothes were the rags of a depths dweller, patched, dusty, carrying the mineral residue of underground passages that had not seen sunlight in decades. His left knee hitched with every 3rd step, the kind of old injury that had been accommodated so long it had become part of the walk rather than an interruption. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and put back together with most of the original pieces, but a different understanding of what they were for. He stopped in the center of the courtyard. His eyes moved across the assembled group with the careful attention of a man reading a complicated map each person noted, each presence felt, each piece identified, and its condition assessed. His gaze lingered on Azindo's shadow, on WuDon's depth, on Zuera's hidden weave. Then his eyes found Pognazara, and something shifted in his face that was larger than recognition. He saw her the way one broken vessel sees another, the protocol's mark calling to its counterpart across the courtyard. 2 minds built by the same maker, 43 years apart.
And you are the one who sealed the door behind her.
Kofi said.
I am.
Pognazara replied, no defense, no excuse, the flat acknowledgement of a woman who had stopped pretending she could set down what she had been carrying. Kofi lowered himself to the ground. His bad knee would not permit extended standing, and sitting freed his attention from the management of pain. He settled with the practiced economy of a man who had arranged himself around that knee for years.
You look like you have been living underground for a decade.
Tibigia said from his post by the western entrance. It was not unfriendly. The soldier's bluntness had the texture of a man who preferred the obvious to the ceremonial.
14 months.
Kofi said. His mouth did something that was almost a smile, the expression of a man who had forgotten the full mechanics of smiling and was working from memory.
But the depths age you the way the veil ages him.
He nodded toward Azindo.
Different weather, same cost. None of you can see what I can see.
Kofi said, and the courtyard went still. Not silent, the damba drums continued their morning rehearsal in the distance. The Harmattan wind continued its dry passage through the old quarter's empty doorways. The root lines continued their clean pulse beneath the earth. But the 6 people assembled in the courtyard went still with the focused attention of people hearing something that rearranges the ground they are standing on.
There is a trap in the chamber.
Kofi described the trap, the way a man who had survived predators described a predator's lair, not with theoretical precision. but with the intimate knowledge of someone who had watched the thing hunt.
Tohaji has built a cage.
He said,
Not a wall, not a barrier, a cage. The kind that lets you walk in. 4 rings, one inside the other, set into the chamber floor and walls and ceiling. Each ring is tuned to one of us.
He touched the ground.
The outermost ring is for me, for the candidate's unified knowledge, the conductor's reach. The second is for the weave.
He looked at Zuera.
The third is for the communion.
Wunam,
The innermost is for you.
Azindo.
For the shadow, for the piece closest to the real skin.
He paused, scratched the side of his bad knee with a thumb, an unconscious gesture of a man organizing his thoughts around a familiar pain.
The cage is built from the system's own body. Obsidian, crystallized root-line material, encoded fugu thread. The same stuff the Zagale used to build their nodes, their groves, their sealed places. Tohaji did not bring foreign material into the chamber. He reshaped what was already there, turned the system's skeleton into a trap for the system's defenders.
How does it spring?
Tibigia asked. The soldier had leaned forward, his hand resting on his weapon, not a threat, but the gesture that helped him think in operational terms.
We spring it by doing exactly what the prophecy says to do.
Kofi's almost smile returned, but colder.
The failsafe has a prescribed order. Pattern opens the door. Listener opens the channel. Rejected one completes the bond. Candidate coordinates the whole. Tohaji has studied that order the way a hunter studies a game trail. He knows where we will step, when we will step, how fast we will move. The cage is shaped to fit our footprints. If we follow the prophecy's path, we walk into the rings in the exact sequence the cage expects. And by the time we realize we are inside it, the outermost ring has closed behind us.
And then,
Samini asked. His petrified staff was planted in the earth, his knuckles white around it.
Then the cage redirects us. The convergence energy, the power of 4 pieces reuniting feeds into Tohaji's third skin instead of the true Enskinment. He becomes what the system was meant to spread across 4 custodians. The unified whole, concentrated in one man.
Kofi's voice was flat. The delivery of a scout's report, stripped of everything but the facts that mattered.
He becomes the system, and we become the fuel.
Silence. The morning sun had climbed high enough to fill the courtyard with hard light. The shadows had shortened to dark pools at people's feet. Azindo's shadow, alone, stretched long and wrong, reaching toward the earth where the chamber waited.
This is suicide.
Tibigia said. The word sat in the courtyard like a stone. Tibigia had not moved from his post by the entrance. His arms were still crossed. His face carried the flat pragmatism of a man who had survived enough battles to recognize the difference between courage and stupidity.
Walking into a trap that is designed for exactly the thing we intend to do.
He continued, his voice level.
With a plan that amounts to do the thing, but differently, against a man who has had 20 years to prepare and is bonded to the system we are trying to fix.
He looked at Kofi.
I have followed orders into bad situations before. This is not a bad situation. This is a killing ground.
You are right.
Kofi said.
If we play the song the trap expects, we die, all of us. The cage captures the solo, the prescribed sequence, the single conductor failsafe. 1 sequence, 4 activations, done.
He paused, looked at Pogna Zara with the directness of a man who had nothing left to lose, and was therefore free to ask for the impossible.
Which is why we will not play a solo. We will play a duet.
A duet requires 2 conductors.
Pogna Zara said. Her voice was very quiet.
Yes.
The courtyard seemed to contract. The air thickened. 6 people, the morning light, the distant drums, and the one question that had been circling since the night Zara had confessed in the cave, finally touching down.
You need me to open it.
Zara said, not a question. The diagnosis of a woman who had spent 43 years knowing this moment would come and 43 years pretending it would not.
The protocol, the knowledge. The reformed mind I sealed in myself at 17 because I was afraid of what it would make me if I let it stay open.
I need you to become the second conductor.
Kofi said.
Ch.6 built the trap for one conductor, one sequence. Two conductors playing different parts of the same convergence, your sequence interlocking with mine, your timing offset, your presence complementing mine would produce a harmony the cage cannot predict. The trap catches a solo. A duet breaks it.
And if the duet fails?
Tibijia said, still at his post, still with his arms crossed.
If the cage adapts, if Ch.6 has planned for this?
Then we die in the chamber instead of in this courtyard.
Kofi said.
But we die trying to fix it, which is more than anyone has done in 43 years.
Tibijia held his gaze. Soldier assessing commander. The calculation was visible, not cowardice, not hesitation, but the hard arithmetic of a man who counted lives for a living, weighing the certain cost against the uncertain gain.
I will hold the door.
Tibijia said finally.
If the cage springs, I pull people out. No arguments, no heroics. Someone has to be the one who decides when it is over.
Agreed.
Kofi said. Pugna Zara had not moved. She stood in the center of the courtyard, the center of the prophecy she had buried for 43 years, and the morning light was not kind to her. It found the white of her hair, the deep lines around her mouth, the bruised hollows beneath her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands that she could no longer fully hide. She was 60 years old. She had been carrying a sealed truth since she was 17. And the man standing across from her, young, ragged, rebuilt, was asking her to break the seal.
I sealed the protocol because I was afraid.
As she said, not to Kofi, not to any of them. To the earth beneath her feet, the earth that had bonded her, that had given her authority, that had waited 43 years for her to finish what she had started.
I was 17.
Her voice thickened. The iron discipline that had held it steady through every confession, every challenge, every cold accounting of her failures, it did not break. But it bent, visibly, the way a beam bends before it gives.
The knowledge was too large. The cost was too clear. I could see what the Enskinment really was: stolen, broken, hurting everything it touched, and I could see what fixing it would require, and I could not.
She stopped. Her hands were fists at her sides. Her jaw was locked. Her eyes were wet, but the tears did not fall, and the effort of holding them was a physical thing, her whole body rigid, her breath shallow, the tendons in her neck standing out like cords.
I could not be what it needed me to be, not at 17, not alone, not with nobody to tell me whether the cost was worth it.
A breath, ragged.
So I sealed it. I built walls. I told myself the walls were wisdom. I told myself that stability was more important than truth, that the world I knew was better than the world that could be, that if I just held everything in place long enough.
Her voice broke. Not dramatically, not with a sob or a cry. A crack. The sound of a clay pot splitting along a seam that had been there for years, finally giving way. Pugna Zara, the Iron Queen, the woman who had not flinched at her own exile order, who had faced Ch.6's accusations with her spine straight and her chin up cracked. A tear fell. One. It ran down the deep groove beside her nose and caught in the corner of her mouth, and she tasted salt and 43 years of silence, and she did not wipe it away.
The walls I built at 17 do not come down gently.
She said. Her voice was rough, stripped.
I need you to understand that. What I sealed it is not a door I can open and close. It is a dam, and what is behind it has been building pressure for 4 decades.
I know.
Kofi said. His voice was gentle. The reformed mind could see the walls. He knew what he was asking. He was asking anyway because the alternative was walking into a trap that would hand the system to a man who had decided to become a god.
I know what it costs. I survived the same breaking, in the same chamber, at the same price.
Zara looked at him, at the marginal candidate with the bad knee and the ragged clothes and the rebuilt mind that had survived the same violence she had survived 43 years later. She saw herself, young, terrified, choosing.
Now I choose differently.
As she said, she pressed her palms to the earth. The earth bond, the deep connection, the authority she had built her entire life upon, and she began to open the seals. It was not clean. The first seal broke with a sound only the connected could hear, a low, sustained crack, felt through the root lines, through the shadow, through the communion. Zada's body jerked. Her breath caught. Her eyes went wide and then squeezed shut, and her fingers dug into the clay until her nails were red with it. A memory poured through the breach. The dome. The breaking. The protocol pulling her 17-year-old mind apart like wet bread, and the terror not of the knowledge, not of the pain, but of the aloneness. The absolute solitude of a girl standing in a chamber built for beings that measured their lives in geological ages, feeling the truth flood in, and knowing that there was no one in the world she could tell. She gasped. A sound wrenched from deep in her chest, raw and involuntary. The second seal, another crack, another flood. The reformation, her mind reassembling around the knowledge, the new shape of her consciousness emerging from the wreckage of the old, and the grief of it. The girl she had been was gone. The woman who replaced her carried something too heavy for her frame and too sharp for her hands, and she wanted her mother, and her mother could not help her, and no one could help her because no one had been where she was. Tears ran freely now. She did not wipe them. Her palms stayed on the earth, pressed flat, anchored. The clay beneath her hands was dark with her tears and her sweat, and the red dust that the wind had blown into the courtyard, and the whole surface was warm and damp and alive beneath her fingers. Seal by seal, wall by wall. The 43-year-old architecture of suppression being dismantled by the woman who had built it, and each wall that fell released a wound she had cauterized and was now opening to the air. She stumbled, physically. Her knees gave, and she caught herself with one hand, the other still pressed to the earth, and Samini took a step toward her and stopped. This was not something anyone could help with. This was a woman taking herself apart and putting herself back together, and the taking apart was not gentle, and the putting together would not be quick. But she did not stop. Wall by wall, seal by seal. The protocol's knowledge emerging from 4 decades of darkness, like a body being excavated from sand, its shape unchanged, its function intact, its truth as immediate and urgent as the day she had received it and been too young and too alone and too afraid to bear. The 3-part harmony in the courtyard shifted, deepened. Zada's unsealing protocol added a richness to the resonance that the 3 pieces had not been able to reach alone, not a 4th piece, but a second voice in the conductor's part. A counterpoint to Kofi's melody. A harmony line that had been silent for 43 years and was now, seal by seal, note by note, beginning to sing. The Zagale's body in the courtyard soil, in the root lines beneath, in the crystallized nodes where the guardians rested vibrated, not in response to the 3-part harmony, in response to the duet. 2 conductors, 2 protocol minds, the frequency of cooperation that the Zagale had always intended, but the faction's fragmentation had prevented. Zada opened her eyes. They were red. Her face was wet. Her hands were shaking. But her hands had been shaking since the night Azindo arrived in Ironhaven, and now they shook for a different reason. Not the tremor of a woman holding something in, the tremor of a woman letting something out.
There.
She said, her voice was hoarse, wrecked.
It is open, all of it.
The courtyard held its breath. The morning sun burned overhead. The Damba drums beat their countdown. 6 people, 4 pieces, 2 conductors, and a plan built on the gamble that a duet could break a cage designed to catch a solo. One day to the alignment. Tomorrow, they would enter the chamber. And in the chamber, Tohage felt the duet's first notes through his 3rd skin. He did not understand them. 2 conductors. His model had not accounted for 2 conductors. The trap was built for one. He had spent 20 years studying the failsafe, its prescribed sequence, its single conductor design, its predictable pattern of activation. He had built his cage to fit that pattern the way a glove fits a hand. Precisely. Intimately, without room for variation. But the sound rising from the courtyard above was not the sound his cage expected. It was richer, layered, two voices where there should have been one, their sequences interlocking in patterns that his third skin could hear but his corrupted mind could not model. The cage's geometry was built for a solo. A duet had angles the cage could not close around, frequencies the rings could not capture, timing his web could not predict. For the first time since he had woven the third skin and felt his face transform, the cage maker did not know what would happen next. He stood in the chamber with his obsidian hand resting on the corrupted skin, the amber glow pulsing beneath his palm, the stone half of his face perfectly still. The human half was not still. The human half was the face of a man recalculating, and the recalculation was not fast enough, and the duet was getting louder. And the system's own body, the obsidian, the crystal, the stone was listening to the harmony, the way a sleeping animal listens to a familiar voice. Remembering. His obsidian half rippled. The material was resonating with the duet, not obeying it, not yet, but hearing it. And the hearing was a crack in a cage that had been built to be perfect. The cage maker did not know what was coming, and that, for the first time in 20 years, frightened him. One day,